I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I laughed. Full on, uncontrollable laughter. Right there in the doorway of my own bedroom. Brandon stood frozen in front of me, completely naked, eyes wide with panic, while Megan from my office scrambled to grab her clothes. The sound coming out of me wasn't hysteria or shock. It was genuine amusement, the kind that bubbles up from somewhere deep in your chest and refuses to stop. They stared at me like I'd lost my mind, which only made it funnier. For 6 years, Brandon had been my fiancé, my future, the man my mother adored and bragged about to anyone who would listen. We were 4 months away from our wedding, living in a townhouse we picked together, sharing friends, finances, and a life that looked perfect from the outside. I worked downtown at a marketing firm, and Brandon was a personal trainer at an upscale gym, always talking about discipline and commitment like they were his personal brand. And yet, there he was in our bed, with the same woman who sat next to me at work and helped me choose my wedding dress. Brandon kept asking if I was okay, while trying to cover himself with a pillow. Megan disappeared into the bathroom, muttering apologies, then reappeared half-dressed, asking if I was having some kind of breakdown. That question sent me into another wave of laughter so intense I had to sit on the floor. Brandon tried switching tactics, saying it wasn't what it looked like, then that it was just a mistake, something that just happened. I laughed even harder because Megan's overnight bag was sitting in the corner, zipped and obvious. After about 10 minutes of this, they finally got dressed and left together, glancing back at me like they were afraid I might snap at any second. An hour later, my mom called in a panic. Brandon had contacted her and told her I'd completely lost it and needed help. She rushed over expecting to find me in pieces, only to see me calmly packing Brandon's clothes into boxes while eating takeout on the couch. When I explained what happened, she kept asking if I was in shock or denial, clearly disturbed that I wasn't devastated. I told her I felt fine, better than fine, actually, which only convinced her something was wrong. The next day at work was almost entertaining. Megan had conveniently called in sick, but Brandon had already done damage control by telling people I'd gone crazy when I caught them. My coworkers looked at me like I might fall apart at any moment. Instead, I walked in smiling, dropped donuts on the break room table, and went about my day like nothing happened. When people cautiously asked how I was holding up, I just said I'd never felt better. My boss even pulled me aside, concerned about my mental state, and I assured her I was completely functional. Brandon, on the other hand, wouldn't stop texting. He kept asking when we could talk about fixing things, as if marriage was still on the table. I replied with laughing emojis and nothing else. When he showed up at my office begging to talk, I laughed right in his face again. Security escorted him out while I waved goodbye, still smiling. That night, my mom organized an intervention with my sisters, convinced I was having some kind of psychological crisis. They sat me down and told me my reaction wasn't normal. That's when I finally explained why I'd been laughing all along. For months before this, I'd already been doubting everything. Brandon monitored what I ate, criticized my friends, and pressured me to quit my job after the wedding so I could support his fitness influencer dreams. I'd been stressed about how to call off the wedding without breaking my mom's heart. What none of them knew was that Brandon had also been draining our joint wedding account. I opened my banking app and turned my phone toward them. The balance was $3,000 when it should have been $18,000. Transaction after transaction showed withdrawals labeled as equipment and supplements. My sisters' faces changed as they scrolled. Brandon had taken $15,000 to fund a social media career that barely existed. That was the moment my mom finally understood. The laughter hadn't been a breakdown. It had been relief. My sisters sprang into action immediately. Alicia grabbed my phone and started scrolling through the bank statements like she was preparing a court case, her jaw tightening with every swipe. Joanne pulled out a notebook and began listing vendors, asking for names and numbers so she could help me figure out what damage control looked like. My mom just sat there staring at the screen, scrolling up and down like she was hoping the numbers would magically change. She finally admitted Brandon had asked her for a loan a month earlier, claiming it was for a honeymoon surprise. She'd given him $2,000 without telling me. The room went silent as that settled in. Alicia announced she was calling her lawyer friend and disappeared into the kitchen before anyone could stop her. Joanne started calling vendors right then, explaining that my fiancé had stolen the wedding money. Suddenly, people who'd been rigid about contracts became a lot more understanding. The florist agreed to work with just my portion of the deposit. Others offered partial refunds or payment plans. Watching my sisters and mom rally around me felt surreal after weeks of being treated like I was unstable for not collapsing. The next morning, I went straight to HR before even sitting at my desk. I told Kaya everything about Brandon and Megan, keeping my voice steady despite my hands shaking. She listened carefully and asked if I felt comfortable continuing to sit next to Megan. I said no without hesitation. Within minutes, she was rearranging team assignments and mentioning a transfer opportunity for Megan at another office. She also made a note to alert building security that Brandon was no longer welcome. By the time I returned to my desk, Megan's space was already empty. The relief was overwhelming. That evening, Brandon showed up at the townhouse with his parents. His mom carried empty boxes like she expected this to be a calm discussion. I blocked the doorway and handed Brandon a folder of printed bank statements without saying a word. His face drained of color as he flipped through the pages. His dad took the folder, read the highlighted totals, and went completely quiet. Brandon tried to explain it was a temporary loan, that he'd planned to pay it back, that he needed the equipment to build his brand. His dad cut him off, asking if he'd seriously stolen from his own wedding fund. His mom looked horrified, apologizing to me over and over. They offered to repay everything immediately. I told them my lawyer would handle it and handed over a business card. Brandon protested, saying lawyers weren't necessary, and his mom actually shushed him, telling him he'd done enough damage. I told Brandon he could pack his things while I watched. He filled 4 boxes, trying repeatedly to talk about fixing our relationship. I didn't respond. On his last trip down the stairs, I told him he had until the end of the month to get off the lease. Work felt lighter without Megan there. Coworkers started inviting me to lunch, and I realized how often I'd turned those invitations down because Brandon didn't like me eating out. I said yes to coffee, to lunches, to after-work drinks. Nobody commented on what I ordered or asked when I'd be home. The freedom felt subtle but powerful. Saturday morning, I met with the wedding planner. Walking through cancellation paperwork felt surprisingly liberating. Some deposits were gone for good, others partially refunded. Combined with Brandon's parents repaying the stolen money, I was going to be financially okay. The planner asked how I was holding up emotionally. I told her the truth. I felt relieved. She smiled and said she'd seen plenty of weddings that should have been canceled and was glad I'd figured it out before making it legal. Monday afternoon, my boss Holden called me into his office. I expected an awkward check-in. Instead, he offered me a leadership role on a major client expansion. More responsibility, better pay, direct client contact. I said yes immediately. 6 months earlier, I'd withdrawn from a similar opportunity because Brandon said it would interfere with wedding planning and our future family. Holden admitted I'd been his first choice back then, too. That night, Brandon's texts turned angry. He accused me of ruining his reputation and destroying his career. I screenshot everything and sent it to my lawyer. When he called repeatedly, I let it go to voicemail and saved those too. His final message threatened I'd regret this. I blocked his number and every social account. The silence afterward felt incredible. When my mom came over later that week, she admitted she'd ignored signs of Brandon's controlling behavior because she wanted the wedding to work. She apologized for the intervention and for not listening sooner. We ate takeout on the couch and talked honestly for the first time in years. It felt like something between us finally shifted. The following weeks felt like stepping into a version of my life I hadn't been allowed to live before. Without Brandon's constant commentary, everything felt quieter and clearer. My coworkers filled the space he'd taken up in my world without even trying. Lunch invitations turned into routines, coffee breaks turned into long conversations that had nothing to do with calories or schedules. I laughed more, slept better, and stopped checking my phone every few minutes out of habit. It amazed me how quickly my nervous system began to relax once the pressure disappeared. One Thursday night, I agreed to happy hour downtown. I ordered margaritas without guilt, ate nachos without commentary, and stayed out until nearly 9 without anyone texting to ask where I was. A coworker mentioned I seemed different lately, lighter somehow. I told her I finally felt like myself again, and she nodded like it made perfect sense. The landlord called the following Monday to confirm Brandon had been removed from the lease effective immediately. I scheduled a lock change that afternoon. When the locksmith handed me the new keys, I stood in the doorway testing every lock twice, feeling something close to triumph. That night, my sisters came over and helped me rearrange the townhouse. We moved furniture, replaced throw pillows, hung new curtains, and completely changed the layout of my bedroom. Every adjustment made the space feel less like a compromise and more like mine. Megan emailed me the next morning with a long apology. She admitted her insecurity, her poor choices, and acknowledged the betrayal without excuses. I read it carefully, then archived it without replying. Forgiveness didn't require access to my life. Indifference felt healthier than anger. Around that time, Etienne from work started joining me for lunch. The conversations were easy, respectful, and never rushed. He never pushed for details about my broken engagement, never hinted at what I should do next. When he said he was happy to move at whatever pace felt right, I believed him. That alone told me everything I needed to know about the difference between him and Brandon. 3 months after the breakup, my life barely resembled the one I'd been mourning. The new client account I led exceeded expectations, and my boss hinted at future growth opportunities. My sisters and I grew closer after finally admitting how much we'd all noticed, but never said. We promised to be honest with each other, even when it felt uncomfortable. Brandon resurfaced briefly through mutual friends, claiming he was in therapy and wanted to make amends. I declined every attempt at contact. Nobody pushed me to reconsider. That respect meant more than dramatic apologies ever could. When Brandon's parents sent the final repayment check, including extra money as an apology, I deposited it and immediately booked a solo trip to Iceland. Brandon had always dismissed it as impractical. Booking it felt like reclaiming a dream I'd shelved for someone else's priorities. The trip changed me. Hiking through volcanic landscapes alone, watching the northern lights without anyone else's expectations hovering over me, I realized how much of myself I'd lost trying to be agreeable, supportive, and small. Standing on a cliff overlooking the ocean, I felt peaceful in a way I never had inside my engagement. After I returned, Etienne asked me to dinner and made it clear it was a date. I said yes without hesitation. The evening felt easy and intentional. He asked permission before holding my hand, before kissing me goodnight. Nothing felt rushed or conditional. For the first time, affection felt safe. Not long after, my boss officially offered me a senior marketing director position with a significant raise and my own team. I accepted without doubt. I realized how close I'd come to giving all of this up for someone else's fragile ego. 6 months after the day I came home early and found Brandon with Megan, I sat alone in my townhouse, looking around at a life that finally felt like it belonged to me. My career was thriving. My relationships were honest and supportive. My home reflected my taste instead of compromise. My future felt open instead of scripted. I ran into Brandon once at a coffee shop. He looked exhausted, smaller somehow. He asked if we could talk. I gave him 5 minutes. He told me his influencer plans failed, that he was struggling, that he regretted everything. When he asked if there was any chance we could try again, I laughed. Not cruelly, genuinely. The absurdity of it all amused me. I wished him well and walked away without hesitation. That laughter everyone thought was a breakdown had never been madness. It was relief. It was freedom finally surfacing after months of ignored instincts and swallowed doubts. Getting caught gave me an exit I'd been too afraid to take myself. Looking back, I'm grateful every single day that I trusted that moment instead of fighting it. Some betrayals don't destroy you. They save you.